Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm so excited to bring you the second part of my Best of the Year series. This time I'm focusing on speculative fiction, particularly science fiction and fantasy. This is going to be a combination of backlist titles as well as new releases. And I think I have a good variety here that's pretty representative of the science fiction fantasy I've just been enjoying lately. All that being said, let's get started. Now, I planned this to be a top 5 video. However, when I went to compile my list, I ended up with 7 books. So instead, I'm going to do 2 honorable mentions. And the first one is The Wrong Stars by Tim Pratt. This is an epic, diverse space opera that I have been gushing about this year. In my initial review, you might have heard me talk about this being the book that I read the day that I found out that I was going to go into labor 3 months early. And I was so anxious about the health of my son. Of course, he is home, he's healthy, all that good stuff. But at the time, I didn't know any of that, and I was so afraid. And I read this book in the hospital, and I've got to say, a book that can pull me in and immerse me in a story and take me out of my own anxiety when I was in that mental state says a lot about the book itself. And so if you're looking for a fun adventure story with great characters, I cannot recommend the series enough. It was so much fun and just the escape that I needed at the time, so I had to include it as an honorable mention. Now, my other honorable mention is Saloons and Stardust by Pamela. This is a collection of speculative stories that are mostly science fiction and fantasy with some elements of horror, and I really enjoyed this. I wanted to include it as an honorable mention because while I love some of the stories, other ones didn't completely work for me, but that's pretty much the case with almost every short story collection I read. But the stories I did like, I liked a lot. I loved them, in fact, and I've been thinking about them since I read them. So there were just stories that had Western settings and mixed together elements of science fiction, artificial intelligence, environmental issues, and all of the stories are centered around strong women persevering. And I just connected with so many of the stories, and I basically found a new favorite author. I definitely want to read everything that she has published, and at this point I have read all 3 of her published collections, and I'm anxiously excited to see what she's going to do next. So if you enjoy short story collections, or even if you don't, I really encourage you to give Pamela Jeff's stories a try because they are so much fun and just left such a big impact on me. Now, getting into the actual top 5, in the number 5 position, we have Tiamat's Wrath by James S.A. Corey. This is the 8th book in the Expanse series. I really can't say much about the plot, but I'll let you know that this is an epic space opera series that I have been loving for years. There is one more book that is supposed to come after this one. And for anyone interested in the Expanse series but aren't sure if the later books are just as good, this is proof of that. This book is probably one of the best in the series. There was just really good character development, some good twists and turns that I did not see coming. It pulled at my heartstrings, and it was a great setup for what is going to be an amazing finale. So I cannot recommend the series enough, but you do have to start back at the beginning, which is of course Leviathan Wakes. Now at number 4, we have a fantasy series, and that is the Arcane Ascension, the first book being Sufficiently Advanced Magic by Andrew Rowe. And this series I haven't actually reviewed yet on my channel, but I'll get that video posted for you very soon. I actually read the first book back at the very end of 2018. I finished it on the very last day of December, and I did the terrible booktube thing that I think a lot of us do, and I filmed my Best of the Year video before the year was technically over because I was on holidays and I had time to film. And wouldn't you know, I found a book that I loved that I didn't get to include last year, but I then continued on and read the second book this year, and I fell in love with the series even more. Now, I won't go too far into the synopsis, but this is set in a world where people get attunements, which are their magical abilities, by going to towers and solving puzzles. The story follows a really smart young man who has social anxieties, and we get to see him work through these towers and get his first attunement and then go off to magic school. So if you like magic school settings, if you like stories that involve really complex, interesting, hard magic systems, you will love this one. I got so addicted to the story, and when I finished book 2, I was left with such a big book hangover. The series is not done, and I am dying for book 3. So I can't recommend that one enough. I will be getting some reviews out to you shortly, but if you're interested, please go read it. It is so good, and more people need to check it out. Now at number 3, we have Escaping Exodus by Nicky Drayden. This is an epic space opera that is set in a future where people have left Earth and have formed a matriarchal society where they go and find these giant beasts that are floating around in space, and they go and land on them and basically make a home within these beasts. And the story just goes from there. This is a book that I just finished, so you have not seen me review it yet. I'm going to try to film something and get it up in the next month or so. But this is the reason that I really shouldn't film my best of the year videos too soon, because wow, this book came out of nowhere. I picked it up on a whim and I loved it. It is full of diverse characters. There are some fantastic relationships that happen because in the society, they are basically forced to be polygamous in order to control the family size and the number of children they have. And I really liked the relationship aspects to this book. You probably know I'm not normally a romance person, but for whatever reason, this book worked for me on that level. This book just deals with a lot of wonderful themes in terms of diversity and life issues and equality. And I just thought it was all done in a really complex way where it wasn't black and white. There weren't perfect characters, but rather everyone was morally complex and just made imperfect choices at times and felt so relatable. So for the characters that felt so well-rounded, I was so invested in all of their perspectives. I cannot recommend this one enough. I need to do a proper review because I'm just gushing about it. And I almost want to put it higher up on my list, but because I just read this book, I'm not sure if my reaction to it is affecting my ranking, but it's definitely top 3, maybe top 2, and loved it, loved it, loved it. Although I do need to say it's not going to be for everyone. There's a lot of body horror type stuff in here. There is a lot of sex and adult material, and there are scenes with some alien tentacles that are going to turn people off if you don't like kind of gruesome, weird things. This book has a lot of weird stuff, but it was the kind of weird I wanted. I was shocked how much I liked this book because I didn't think it was going to be my thing, but wow, just what an unexpected surprise. Now at number 2, we have To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This is her novella about a group of people that are going from planet to planet, exploring and investigating what is going on the surface. Instead of terraforming the planets in order to meet our needs, this is set in a future where people are able to biologically change their bodies in order to adapt to different environments. And this is basically a love letter to exploration. And it's just a wonderful, very accessible piece of hard fiction, specifically hard science fiction, which is what I've said all year I have been craving. And so this book just fit what I was looking for so well. And while it was only a novella, I spent so long reading it just because I was going sentence by sentence and just savoring all the little tidbits. Now, while I say that this is a piece of hard science fiction, I want to emphasize again that this can be read by anyone because Becky Chambers takes the time to explain what is happening in a way that any layperson can understand. Even someone like myself that doesn't have a university level of science background is able to comprehend what's happening and really enjoy the story. Some people do not like the ending to this book. I personally thought it worked with the story and I had a wow moment when I finished it. I'm not saying that I would make the same choices as the characters, but I don't need to agree with the characters in order to like an ending. So even though some people will disagree with me, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a solid book with a solid ending and definitely was worthy of my number 2 slot. Finally, at number 1, are you able to guess it? That book, of course, is Under the Skin by Michel Faber. This is a piece of literary speculative fiction that is about a woman that goes around the Scottish country highlands picking up strangers in her car and taking them away for mysterious purposes. I always try to keep the synopsis really brief because it's best going into this one without knowing too much. It's very easy to spoil this book. And while it sounds like a thriller, it's really not. It definitely has elements of horror. There is some really good body horror that happens. This book has amazing writing. It is visceral and taut, and I loved it. I am not someone who normally likes literary fiction, but this one was very accessible, and it was just so smart and explored a lot of themes that really made me question my own beliefs. And I really like that in a book. This book is very weird. It's not going to be for everyone, although I do want to encourage everyone to try it. But keep in mind that this book weirded me out in places, and I wasn't entirely sure I liked it until I absolutely loved it. I think it's one that I'm going to love even more every time I reread it, and I'm definitely going to reread it because I've been thinking about it all year. When I went to put together this list, I had no doubt that this was going to be in the #1 slot, and it was just a matter of figuring out what books would fall underneath it and in what order. But if I had to pick one book out of all 3 of my videos as my top favorite book of the year, this is it. I could have called it horror. I can call it horror in some ways. It depends on how picky you are in terms of genre classification. But wow, this book impressed me so much. I am so excited to check out more by Michel Faber next year because this book blew me out of the water. Thank you to Laura, my friend online, that recommended this book to me, and I just wish I'd read it sooner because it was fantastic. So that is it for my favorite science fiction and fantasy books of 2019. I would love to hear your reactions down below. Do you agree? Were these books favorites for you, or are you planning on picking some of them up for the next year? I would also love to know if there were some surprises on this list, or maybe books that you thought were going to be included but didn't quite make the cut. If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. I do read quite a bit of adult science fiction, some fantasy, and a lot of horror. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. As always, I will talk to you again soon in my last best of the year video, which is going to be covering my backlist horror books. And trust me, there's some good ones, so I hope you stick around. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.